I forget what the name of it is, the Climate Change World UN.
Oh, other than Ministry for the Future. Well, at the very beginning, they give it some other name.
Ministry for the Future.
And then they're like, oh, but it's the Ministry for the Future.
I should have got that right.
Wait, I thought you were trying to remember the other official name. That's really funny.
Hello, everybody. I'm Cody Troyer.
And I'm Brent Gaisford.
And we are the Hugonauts. This time we are talking about Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson.
Cool, 576 pages, 20 and a half hours, nice thick KSR tome, as voted on by and selected by the Hugonauts Discord. So we're fresh off the discussion. And yeah, that was fun. And we're excited to talk with you all about it here.
Yes, and next time we will be doing not a ranking, but a pool, if you will, of our very favorite first contact novels. So that should be a fun episode.
Super stoked. There's so many good ones. It's going to be hard to get it down to like a manageable list that we can cover in not 6 hours.
Yeah, and we might end up like ranking a little bit. You never know, you know.
Yeah, and we just might slim it down to like 4 hours. Anyway, okay.
So what happens in Ministry for the Future? Let's get to it.
For sure. So the Ministry for the Future opens with a deadly heat wave striking India and killing 20 million people, which is a tough, gripping start to the book. And from there, it follows Mary, the head of the Ministry for the Future, a UN ministry that is tasked with stopping climate change and dealing with this existential risk to society. And that's really what it is all about. It's about society's struggle to solve this problem. Is it dystopian? Is it utopian? You'll have to read and decide. Anyway, we're going to talk about it. So yeah, that's the setup.
This episode is sponsored by The Pythagorean by Alexander Morpheigh, a mind-bending journey through ancient Greece and modern Athens.
When programmer Theo wakes up in ancient Greece, inhabiting the body of a suicidal youth, his life takes an unexpected turn. Guided by the enigmatic Pythagoras, he learns about philosophy, mysticism, and the true nature of reality. This isn't just a time travel story, it's a thought-provoking exploration of consciousness with witty dialogue, surprising twists, and a blend of ancient wisdom and modern science that will leave you questioning everything.
Check out The Pythagorean at the link in the episode notes.
All right, let's do
Yeah. What did you think of KSR? You first.
I'm going first? Ooh, I'm going to poison the well.
Why not?
I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. This is a pretty classic Kim Stanley Robinson situation. It's like the most Kim Stanley Robinson of all Kim Stanley Robinsons. There's a lot of really interesting scientific ideas. It's all presented as facts, but a lot of it is opinions. And this thing, like in the Mars trilogy, it's kind of fine that it's presented as facts. But in this case, it's kind of like, ooh, we're kind of just riffing here and saying stuff that we assert is true, aren't we, KSR? So that was tough. And also there's kind of no characters. But in the end, I really liked it. So that's how we ended up at a 3. My rating of the book really varied. At the beginning, I was like 5 out of 5. And then I was like 1 out of 5. And at the end, I was like, okay, 3 out of 5. So anyway, that's my review.
Yeah, I kind of same with me. Three overall, and like opened on a 5, and then waffled between 1 and 4 throughout, and then like the ending. It's nice to have optimistic near future climate fiction. You know, something to work towards. And you know, even if some of the ideas are a bit silly, perhaps, they at least it presents an optimistic view, and it's something we can, you know, some hope to look forward to, versus a lot of other climate fiction.
It's funny that we both landed at the same spot after like jumping around wildly in how we viewed the book. Anyway. Yeah,
totally. Well, it's also pretty long, so you have that. It has that going for it. There's a lot of chances.
That's true.
Let's start with
you know what? On that note, I should say I started reading this book like a year ago, and I did not finish it. I quit like probably 30 or 40% in and was like, I do not like this. And then the you know, on the Discord, it got voted on and picked as the Discord book. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this then. And I read it, and it turns out I just quit at like the worst spot and then it got better again after that. But anyway, so if you're reading and struggling, trust me, it does get better. I mean, it gets to like a 3. It's not like it's a 5 at the end. But anyway, it does get better.
Yeah. There's definitely something there. And just to clarify what we were alluding to about the plot a little more, or I guess the plot structure, the voice, the overall, what the book is. It's like it's like a fiction book that reads like a nonfiction book, or vice versa. Either way, I mean, it feels like nonfiction a lot of the time. And then there's some characters. We have two main characters we follow, Frank and Mary. Frank is in the Heatwave in India working for the Peace Corps, I believe. He's an American.
Some NGO. Yeah, who's to say?
Yeah, and he's the only survivor, and because of his nutrition during his upbringing and in his youth, and he kind of has to carry that with him as he goes throughout the novel, and various things happen to him.
PTSD. He saw like literally everyone living in this village he was in, like tens of thousands of people all died. Like everyone should read the Heatwave chapter at the beginning of this book. It's universal. Like everybody on the Discord agrees. Like it's one of the best opening chapters of any book ever. It's incredible, and like I think is something that we all need. Like we need to remember, climate change isn't this like abstract thing that's happening to no one. Like that is not the case. There will be like very serious negative consequences if we don't do anything. And he did a great job of laying that and bringing it home.
Yeah, right away, drawing you in and saying, and remembering to reminding you that of those ramifications, because it's so visceral. And I almost wonder if it's, certain books you read and you're like, I remember liking that. I don't remember anything about it. And it might get a 4 or might get, or whatever. This Heatwave chapter, I think about it all the time. Like it stuck with me. And so is that make the whole book that much more valuable? I don't know if that's true, but like nothing sticks with, like it will matter in my life more than other things I've read that I liked more. Just because of that first chapter.
Yeah, for sure. I feel you on that. Yeah, I think that's probably right.
It's powerful. Back to the other character is Mary, who is part of the, I forget what the name of it is, the Climate Change World UN type.
Oh, other than Ministry for the Future. Well, at the very beginning, they give it some other name, and then they're like, oh, but it's the Ministry for the Future.
I should have got that right.
Wait, I thought you were trying to remember the other official name. That's really funny.
Any name would have done, but perhaps the eponymous title of the book. And so we follow Frank and Mary a bit.
She's Irish. Good old Mary.
She is. But there's also a lot of random voice changes. We get to be a proton. We get to be the market. We get to be carbon.
We get to be the idea of code.
Right.
That was
that one. It was tough.
So bad. Some of them are interesting. Some of them are very bad. Yeah, this was one on the Discord. There was like really disparate opinions. Some people are like, yo, all those chapters were garbage and I hated them. And some people are like, they were so refreshing and nice to break the pace. Yeah. Anyway, they're weird. We can all agree on this.
To begin with, I liked that he went for it. So that I gave him some credit there. I really liked the carbon one and the proton one.
You're willing to forgive the code for the sake of carbon
and protons. Yeah, the code one and the market one were
the market was
too much
too. Yeah.
So maybe it was ones that I feel like we've seen that before in other science fiction, and it also kind of makes like you can make sense out of that a little bit. Like you see it in writers trying to talk about an alien's experience or something, and it's a little more scientific, the proton and the carbon, so it worked.
I have another wild idea for you on why this worked. I think because he picked a specific photon and a specific carbon atom to follow, and all of those sections are told first person, and so that made it work. But like you can't be like, I am the market. He could have been like the market in like the old bazaar in Turkey if he'd wanted to do, but that's not what he did. He was trying to be like the idea of a thing, and so doing it to like grossly simplay it didn't work as well. But picking like a specific carbon atom,
$1 would have been cool.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the market atom.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
And then there's also a good deal of long interjections that are clearly just him writing his opinion like an essay, like no fiction whatsoever, and presenting it as fact, which are the parts of the book that Brett and I are talking about, like being like, can you, like, is that a good thing to do? Like, the optimism's great, but to bring it completely out of the fictional world and make it feel like, no, this is true, when it's just his opinion is a little much.
Yeah, for sure. There's some, we'll talk about some of the details. There's like some of those where it's like, oh, that really worked. And there's others where like, I think both of our like BS radars went off like to 40, like so much off the scale.
Yeah.
And so that's okay.
A lot of the economics stuff is spongy.
Yeah, yes.
But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. You had one more.
I almost went off on a huge.
I know.
I just was so close.
I grabbed the back of your shirt before you fell over the cliff. You had one like fun other thing that you said.
Oh yeah.
Very
At
Kim
one point,
Stanley
he was
Robinson.
talking about. There's a bunch of cool chapters in Antarctica because Antarctica is very important for climate change. Basically, there's a huge amount of ice on Antarctica. If it all melts, the ocean will rise a buttload, that's an official scientific term, and swamp the majority of where the majority of us live, because most of us live in coastal places. That would be bad. So a lot of the book takes place in Antarctica, and they're trying to figure out how to stop the glaciers from melting. A lot of really cool science there. In so doing, Kim Stanley Robinson clearly read a lot of articles about how to do this, which is cool, but he also just decided at one point, he's like, oh, and there are 74 large glaciers that drain Antarctica. And it's like, oh, that's a cool fact. And then he's like, yeah, and and he lists all 74 names. And I think actually he gets to the end of it and he's like, oh, and that was actually 115. I named a few more. It's like, oh, great. Thanks, Kim. Like, I really appreciate it.
Yeah. He's like, I could have done more. You're welcome. That is a fun section. I guess that segues nicely into science as well. And the science in the book that was interesting to us. One of those pieces that he focuses on a lot is glacier pumping, or the like lubricating the water below the glacier.
Unlubricating.
Sorry.
So
yeah.
Go ahead. So glaciers. Yeah. So glacier is a bunch of ice on land. And when what's currently happening is there's sheets of water from it melting, and they're between the glacier and the rock. So it's lubricating the glacier so the glacier can slide much more quickly off the rock. So the idea is you drill big holes through the glacier and then pump the water out from below it. And if you can pump all the water out, then the glacier will settle back down onto the rock. So you've got ice on rock, and they still flow. That's how glaciers naturally move. But the rate of movement is much slower, the natural rate. And basically you stop this runaway cascade of fresh water into the ocean.
Right. And glaciers like just falling off completely, losing themselves in whole chunks.
Yep.
It's a super cool idea.
Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, he presents it as the one that would work. And also, I mean, he presents a couple other things that would work too that we'll also talk about. But yeah, this is one where I was like, yeah, I can see how this could work. And it would be like a huge amount of resources, but also, could be worth doing. And it could, basically, it doesn't stop climate change, but the idea is it mitigates one of the like very, very bad impacts of climate change. And stops the sea level from rising so much. Anyway, I just think it's a really smart idea, and I think there's a chance we do end up doing something like it because the world's definitely getting hotter. We're doing that.
It seems like a pretty low cost alternative to other extremes that we might have to do if it gets worse beyond that. Like moving all of our cities and populations from where they are.
That's a bad idea. We shouldn't do that.
It unfortunately seems more realistic, but hopefully somebody reads the good parts of the KSR and we move towards some of these things. Another one that is interesting that a lot of authors have played with, like Neil Stephenson in Termination Shock, is releasing sulfur into the atmosphere, much like a volcano does, to slow down.
You reflect the heat. Yeah, before the heat can get into the atmosphere, if you put sulfur in the super high atmosphere, it reflects, basically. So it's like a reverse greenhouse
sun's energy
gas.
Back into space.
Yeah, and this is why after huge volcanic eruptions, the Earth is colder for a while. Like famously, I think it was was it the 17 or 1800s where there was like a year without a summer in Northern Europe. Anyway, when big
no. It
volcanoes
was
happen, this
the
happens.
Dark Ages. That's why it was called the Dark Ages. The 500, 600, somewhere back there.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Maybe again in the 1700s too. I don't remember.
I was talking about
but
the
that's-
Little Ice Age was this,
ooh.
but yes, I like the Dark Ages too. Anyway, so yeah, the idea is we do that. So a bunch of, in the book, after the heat wave, India decides like, well, we're not doing this anymore. 20 million of people just got killed. We're going to cool the planet down unilaterally. And so they fly a bunch of planes up into the high atmosphere and have them vent sulfur. And in the book, it works. Temperature drops by like a degree or two for a few years.
Yeah, and it seems like it would work. He doesn't get into the negative effects as much as he could have. There are some, like, it affects algae blooms in weird ways, and other things obviously have, affecting it. The climate like that has some consequences, but like crop yields would be another example. But it is an interesting idea. And another one that I liked was, is it obvious that I'm not the science guy yet? I'm kind of like 0 for 3 on explaining these. Here's one that's not as sciencey. I liked the idea of paying residents, basically like an eminent domain law, paying residents of small towns to move to create larger aggregated nature reserves. Like the one that is my favorite in the book is a nature trail that goes from the Yukon all the way through the Rocky Mountains. Up in Alaska all the way down to almost, does it finish off at tip of New Mexico or something?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think he calls it Yukon to Yellows.
Oh, Yukon to Yellowstone. So it just goes to Montana. All right.
Yeah, but I think he then did say they extended it more. That was just like the catchy name.
Oh, okay.
Was Yukon to Yellowstone. But yeah, I really like that too. And I mean,
it's just a good idea. Like, we don't need,
yeah.
like, it's problematic to the climate to have people living in smaller, dispersed populations rather than aggregated ones. Although I don't know that we want to do that as humans. I think everyone who lives like that really wants to be out alone. So that's one problem that you'd have to overcome.
It's a really hard problem to solve. I really like nature does a good job of taking care of itself. If we can just set aside land, it's real clear, it recovers really well and all that stuff. So I liked I think the beginning of his idea we could definitely do, which is like, we have a bunch of big wild areas and we should keep expanding those and having more areas we don't touch, but then connecting those with wildlife corridors so you can have big animals basically, because they need really big ranges. I think that's great. We're building an overpass for cougars here in the LA area right now. Actually, we're spending a ridiculous amount of money on it because we're bad at building stuff cheaply here, but I think it's going to cost $100 million to build this cougar bridge, but it's still cool that we're building it. We're building it over the 101, which is like an enormous freeway in LA. And so we're going to connect 2 patches of cougar habitat because on one side of it, the cougars are getting inbred basically. And so they're starting to get sick. So if we can build this bridge over the freeway, then they can start to intermix and the whole thing becomes viable wildlife habitat. Anyway,
all right, city boy, we've been doing that forever in Colorado. We're way... I know
are your highways about. 12 lanes wide?
Yeah, exactly. But it's just another one of the interesting ideas he presents, like that idea, and taking the if you take all of the small towns and populations out of those areas, there's less need to like have so much micro transit between them, so the wildlife can travel more freely.
Yeah, for sure.
He also talks a lot about consequences of climate change in this novel, which is the part that I found the most realistic, and the part that we're seeing play out more in the world, which makes sense because, of course, we always see the violent things play out first, or we're just exposed to them more, and our brains gravitate towards them.
You
What
mean
are some
this,
of
this
this?
is the children of Kali?
Yeah, environmental terrorism, children of Kali. Take it away.
Yeah, for sure. So in India, again, after the heat wave, a group arises called the Children of Kali who start assassinating people who they view as being personally responsible for climate change, like CEOs of oil companies who in the past have said that they don't think climate change is real and therefore they're not going to do anything to stop it. And they kill them. And in the book, this is sort of presented as a good thing and changing people's behavior. And it's just a really interesting thing to think about. So here's the thing that the book has gotten me. I'm taking no position on whether Children of Kali should be doing what they're doing, obviously. But here's what's really interesting about this and what the book really made me think about is killing someone ever justified? And I think the answer to that has to be yes, right? Like we would all, if we could time travel to like 1938 and you could just shoot Hitler, you should do it, right? Like you could save like 12 million people's lives. So it's very obvious that in that case, violence is justified. What gets harder is in the real world, you don't know what the future will actually be like, right? So how do you know if you taking this violent act will make the world better or worse? I don't know. It's just so interesting to think about.
It really is. And he presents, I mean, the other thing you're kind of saying, but not saying, we've said it before, like the only answer to violence is violence. I mean, so many books deal with that. Babel talks about it a lot. We talked about it a bit with Clockwork Orange actually last time. But the idea
Starship
that
Troopers.
if somebody is doing something that is killing other people and they will not stop, then the only recourse left is to stop them. And so that's what he brings up a lot in the novel. He also, though, I think presents a really interesting way out, which is what why I enjoyed thinking about it more with Ministry for the Future. The Goldilocks paradox about wealth, which is there is a certain, a proven certain amount of money that once your needs are met, plus you stop getting any kind of happiness benefit from having more money, that's everyone's choice, really. But he presents it in an interesting way, and then the characters in the book the world is presented with this idea and present hyper wealthy individuals with, look, we will allow you to keep a lot of what you have and it's going to be plenty, or our other option is like these terrorists and other people are going to keep coming after you.
Yeah, I think in the book it's like, do you want to keep 50 or 60 million dollars, which is a preposterous, that's like what the average, that's like 30 human lifetimes. You can keep 30 human lifetimes of output in your bank account and then you'll be a good guy. Is that a good trade for you? And a lot of them decide yes.
Yeah, and it's kind of a humane way, instead of just saying, you're evil, you've been evil, kill. It's like, all right, we're going to give you a pretty good option here. Here's your out. Here's your plea deal.
And this is the thing about Children of Kali that's so complicated, right? Is because it's like the argument is by the Children of Kali doing this violence, they're creating an alternative. Like they're the stick, basically, right? And then society can offer some carrots about like, okay, hey, well, I guess it sort of sticks on both sides. But anyway, the point is like, well, those are some very bad, scary guys. You don't want to be on their bad list, right? Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it totally is. And there's also there's also a lot of interesting, realistic ways that he shows that technology can help organizations like that be more effective against, big government military, right? Like the drone clouds they send up to bring down planes that business. If the passenger manifest has only business people on it, and so they're flying for quote unnecessary reasons, they'll send up drone clouds to clog the engines like a bird strike and bring down planes. And so people stop flying slowly in the novel.
This was
because they're scared to fly. They're scared
and
if
they all start
fly for
taking
business.
airships, and so it takes like 5 days to cross the Atlantic. Yeah, this was one where I was like, what's the, like, did Kim Stanley Robinson not read the right papers though? Because like we can, so yes, we're never going to be able to have battery powered planes, but we could like make artificial liquid fuels. Like you can make liquid hydrogen from like solar power, wind power, whatever you want, and then make liquid fuels and then put them in a plane, and then you don't cause any climate change with the plane. I was just surprised that his solution was like, no more planes. We have to get rid of them. Airships.
That is like, interesting. I don't know that
why did we have to do that?
I think because he likes them.
He thinks airships are sick.
Yeah, that was my takeaway, because it felt a lot of like the Mars trilogy to me. I was like, airships just like are so sick. Like,
I think you're right. I also think
instead.
that Kim Stanley Robinson has like a misguided view of what like quote unquote important people's lives are like. Like Mary, the head of this UN ministry, at one point just like casually takes an airship to San Francisco, and it's fine that it takes like 10 days. It's not fine for you to spend 10 days in transit if that's your job. It's actually not. It's not fine, and no one will accept that.
Yeah, and that's a lot of.
She does a lot of like swimming in the lake.
I was gonna say it's a lot of swimming with no like professional protection escort for somebody of that status. Okay, but you fell into the classic KSR trap, and you went wildly off of the topic I was talking about into planes, into Mary swimming. Yes. I'm going to bring it back to drone strikes, which are already happening in Ukraine. There are like workshops of people putting explosives in cheap drones to use.
I mean, it's more
weapons.
Professional than that. Yeah, I mean, drones are like the most.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about like
they're like big companies now. Yeah.
Yes, but his point in the novel is like you can get a dime store drone and send it up, and it could have an impact, and like for sure. That people, even the poorest people in the world, can like have an impact on that stuff, which is frightening, and also why it feels realistic here. Some of that stuff's already happening, and then also obviously the targeting of executives.
Yeah, for sure.
It feels prescient because it's reality.
Yeah. Should we talk about the carbon coin and carbon tax?
Yeah, I wanted to address something else, but let's move on. There's too much. There's too much stuff. Like every cast, when we talk about the Mars trilogy too, it's like, where do we stop this? There's so many interesting things.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
How do you? So you wanted to talk about carbon coin.
Yeah, so I do want to talk about carbon coin. So first of all, I want to say this was the carbon coin itself was one of the economic things in the book that made me insane, but there are like good ideas underneath it. So first of all, let me present why this made me crazy. At one point, he's like, okay, so we have this idea for a carbon coin, which the short version of this is that he wraps it up in some cryptocurrency nonsense, but at the end of the day, it's basically we're going to print an absolute buttload of money, and we're going to give it to people who don't burn fossil fuels to like bribe them. And then at one point he has a whole chapter where there's like, yeah, and the central bankers all couldn't agree on whether it would cause inflation or disinflation. Who's to say? It doesn't matter. Let's just try it. And it's like, oh, I actually have a pretty good idea what might happen if we printed an absolute buttload of money, Kim Stanley Robinson. We might have enormous inflation. And then he was also like, yeah, and the impact of having a carbon coin was just the same as when we used to use it to burn fossil fuels. It was just as good for the world. And it was like, it's actually like, oh no, that's not true. If we pay Saudi Arabia to keep a barrel of oil in the ground, nothing happens. Right now, if we pay them for a barrel of oil, you get to drive your car like 1,000 miles. People really like traveling. And in your version of the future, that doesn't happen at all. You don't actually get anything for it. Anyway, which isn't to say that we shouldn't do some carbon taxation. I love a good carbon tax, but yeah,
that one, I think the carbon coin was my favorite one because that there were a lot of things in the book that I was like, really cool idea, probably totally feasible. Let's do that. And some ideas there, I'm like, what? Like, have AI run the markets as a central. What are you thinking? But the carbon one was like, oh, like that's a good starting point. I'm not sure the incentives work, but like he kind of describes the incentives working in a way that I could get behind, but not totally. I could definitely get behind the idea that central bankers don't understand basic inflation policy, because they don't seem to with the money we have now either. But anyways, that was a good middle one. It was a fun thinker, and I liked where it worked. And then there's sometimes where I fought against it, but that felt like a good fictional middle ground.
Well, and in general, I think what he's trying to point out here is like the world has a lot of resources, and if we chose to spend them on ending climate change, we could do it. And I very much agree with that, actually. I think it won't be as catastrophically expensive as we all think. And I think something that a lot of people forget about is that we already spend an enormous amount of money, and therefore like money just represents people's time. Like we already spend a lot of our societal time and energy on generating energy. And so it's not like we need to all that time that we spend, like that is already allocated. We just need to spend it on slightly different stuff. And the stuff we need to spend it on is only slightly more expensive than the stuff that makes the earth catch on fire. So anyway, I think I really like that optimistic point of view and that idea that like society has resources, we should spend them on this. I very much agree with that, and I think we can succeed. I just think the economic methods that he's chosen to deploy here are dangerous,
dubious. Dubious. Yeah, and I think that's the one part of the book where you say dangerously misinformed. We're talking about the chapters where it's just his opinion presented as fact, or in there's some of that regarding economics, and then also it's just somewhat in the text. But when you say dangerously, I feel like that's right, because that's the part of the book that felt to me like someone's going to read this and be mad that we're not doing this stuff and like try to fight for it. It's like, no, I don't think. Some of these
he
are
also
great,
just like in passing was like, oh yeah, and after the heat wave, India just like nationalized all the land, and then the output went way up. And it's like, ooh, would that work? I'm actually certain that we've tried that before, and what always happens is crop yields collapse. Turns out communal ownership of land does not work, Kim. Right. But sweet that you think that would be nice. I agree that it would be nice, but we've really tried it a lot of times and it just doesn't work. Anyway.
There's that one. I think the other one, like I feel like people could pick up on this because it's kind of hot and like, you know, it's got the trendy terms behind it and people don't fully understand. But the idea of like AI controlling central banks and markets is not a good one. Like a centralized market is the exact opposite of what a market is good at. A market is good when it's decentralized, and
that's the point of it, is that no one can tell you what you want. You're allowed to just want what you want.
It's a network of people, all of whom's voices are automatically showing.
Well, and what's interesting about what he said is like part of what the market does is it takes like society is radically too complex for any person to understand. So it like abstracts it away and it just makes it into like a bunch of signals that people can respond to. It's like people want stuff, therefore they're willing to pay for it. Therefore someone else figures out how to make it. And he is correct that like technology is getting better at understanding complex situations, but his then jump to be like, okay, cool. So then AI can manage the whole economy is like, whoa, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And there's so many things we could talk about, like what we think he got right, what we think he got wrong, but that's a good kind of snapshot of all of it. But it all happens again in a shell of like some characters, some nonfiction that is fiction, some of these POV chapters. It's an interesting novel, at least. And the first chapter is 100 1,000% worth a read.
Yeah,
at the
for
very
sure.
least.
The only other thing I'll throw out there that I thought was really special about this book is it has a bunch of chapters that follow the life experience of refugees. And I really
Yeah.
liked how he humanized refugees. Like there's a lot of whatever, people hate immigrants right now. That's like a big part of our worldwide ethos. And it's so strange to me because like we simultaneously like love it when people like move and look out for their families and like make a new life for themselves. And then we're also like, oh yeah, but we hate refugees and immigrants. And he does a really good job humanizing.
It's a NIMBY shit.
It is NIMBY shit. Yeah. He does a really good job humanizing like with these chapters following refugees who are just like fleeing horrible violence, horrible stuff. They're just normal people trying to live. They're not doing anything wrong. He did a really good job of that. And that's not to say refugees aren't complicated and dealing with them is easy. At the end, he kind of like magics away a solution, which was totally impractical. And if we could build 100,000 houses overnight, that would be sick, but obviously we can't. Anyway, so I'm not trying to say refugees aren't a complicated issue, but he really does a good job with some of his little throwaway chapters of making you understand what it really might be like to be a refugee and humanizing them in a way that I think is really powerful.
And also gives the book a nice emotional retreat that is there kind of off and on throughout. But those ones are really powerful.
Yeah. Before we get into recommended books, we want to give a quick shout out to our episode sponsor, The Pythagorean by Alexander Morpheigh. The Pythagorean is a time travel story that explores philosophy, mysticism, and the true nature of reality, and is available at the link in the episode notes.
Okay, so recommended books. This got a little interesting. We had to get creative here because it's a very strange novel. Ministry for the Future is, as you've just heard. My first one I'm going to start with is a nonfiction I read last year about economics called The Value of Everything by Mariana Mazzucato. And as somebody who didn't know that much about economics, doesn't still, it's a really interesting look into what governments define as value, GDPs, things like that, and what we should maybe be looking at instead, and how we should redefine value in our policy making if we're going to be able to, continue operating, or begin, some would say, operating as a fair world, and also to combat climate change and other ills.
Nice. I used to read more econ books. I'm down to like one a year. But anyway, I'll have to put that on the list.
That one's an easy. I didn't give the more complicated one that I got like some of that I just read.
For sure. Okay, I'm going to recommend Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. If you like KSR, you have to read Red Mars. It's like one of the all-time great sci-fi books. I think it's the best book about colonizing Mars. It's got all this same really amazing stuff about really thinking about the science of how to terraform in great detail, but it also has a full cast of characters that are fleshed out a lot better. I'll just throw it out there. I think it's just a better novel, sort of full stop. And it's also a little bit his presenting fiction as nonfiction just kind of works better on Mars, where it's a little more removed
it's all
from our
fiction
society.
Anyways. Yeah.
So it sort of feels okay. It feels like a travel log sort of a thing that hasn't happened yet. Anyway, Red Mars is really tremendous. The rest of that series, Green Mars and Blue Mars, I didn't like as much. Basically, each book in the series I liked less than the one before, but I truly think everyone should read Red Mars. And if you love it, you should keep going. And at the point you stop loving it, you should stop and know that you're done with the series. But yeah.
Just get some momentum up for the academic conferences in book 2 and 3.
That's true.
The other one I'm going to recommend is one that I brought up on our like kind of favorite books of 2023 list episode, which is The Great Transition by Nicholas Fuller Googins, which is a fantastic name. The Goog. And it was his first novel, and it's about near future climate change, but it's more of a plot-driven story. It's shorter. It's kind of a thriller too, and half of it is told about the characters' pasts as they worked through the Great Transition, which was the kind of tipping point of climate change really hammering the world, and how governments and peoples came together to overcome it and move forward. So it's not as much on the science, but it's a lot more on the emotion. And I thought it was a fantastic novel.
For sure.
All right. So post spoilers, there's not much. We pretty much talked about this book.
Okay, so if you don't want to hear about what happens at the end of the book, turn aside here.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to be a very short poor spoiler section because this is not a plot-driven novel. But here we go. We beat climate change.
Hey!
That's pretty much the end of the book. Also, Frank dies, but not in a way that is important. He just gets sick, like happens to people, and then he dies. And there's a really good chapter about death, which is totally disconnected from the rest of the book, but is extremely good. And Mary retires and starts taking vacations, and you hear quite a lot about those. And that is the end of the book.
Classic KSR denouement, just like endless falling action. Are we still going? Okay.
Yeah,
but it is a happy ending.
Do you think it's 30% of the book, or is it like 20% of the book? It's like so much. It's so much of the book.
Yeah.
There's like really long descriptions of like meadows with mountain goats in them. And they spend like whole days, and we spend many, many, many pages looking at these goats in the meadow in the recovered world. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like that's, par for the course with KSR. So if you like that, you like it. And I liked parts of it, and I liked that we beat it. It's just nice to have optimism about subjects like this, because it's not as, our brains are just not as interested in stuff unless it's big and catastrophic. And so fiction often ends up being, like, especially the better selling stuff, ends up being in the climate realm, like post-apocalyptic, for example, on one hard end of the spectrum, or kind of like mixed post-apocalyptic, like a Parable of the Sower or something, where it's just like, yeah, it's really bad, and of course it's really bad. You can see it coming. It's going to be really bad. And I like that KSR has succeeded in making a popular novel that is, can we try something? Even if some of it's crazy, and we're like, okay, dude, some of it doesn't seem crazy at all, and some of it's like, at least let's put a kernel in people's brains. Maybe it won't be so crazy later, and they'll think of this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. And I also think despite how much shark jumping I felt like he did, particularly with economics, I actually felt like that optimism is well-founded. I think we're going to solve climate change.
Oh.
We're not going to let the world cook itself. It's not even going to cost that much money. We'll take it seriously eventually. I hope before a heat wave kills 20 million people. Once it becomes,
I think, classic two-line curve. Once it becomes less expensive than not doing it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it actually already is. Solar power has gotten so cheap, dude. Anyway, there's one tech idea that happened at the very end that I wanted to talk about. So I guess we'll call it a spoiler. So here it is. They dyed the Arctic Ocean yellow. They just like dumped a bunch of yellow food coloring in it, because that makes same idea as the sulfur dioxide.
Right.
It reflects the photons. So instead of going into the ocean and heating the ocean up, they just reflect back out to the atmosphere. And I've just had no idea that yellow water reflected light more. And I just thought I was like, oh, cool.
Yeah. And maybe maybe that works for, maybe that's how you solve the algae bloom issue with the sulfur, and algae blooms in general, which are a huge problem. But you see it a lot at like botanical garden, for example, that the water's black. They put in black food coloring so that algae won't just take over the entire pond.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it can't grow there, because that is an issue, especially as we use a hand over fist, run out the world's resources of phosphorus to try to keep commercial agriculture
fertilizer. Going. Yeah. Yeah, we
But
love Fertilizer
okay,
Age.
now we're
Okay, we're back off.
we're
You're
way
right. We're back
past
off. We're
where
back
we're
off.
supposed
Okay.
KSR.
I think that's it. Is there anything else we really should talk? I have many other notes I took during the book, but you're right. They're all radically off the reservation. If you want to talk to me about Davos, send us an email, I guess.
yeah. Or come to the Discord and chat about it on the book club.
Good point.
Because it's the book club book. And next time, don't forget to join us for our very favorite First Contact novels. So many cool types. That's going to be a wide-ranging list of very different novels I'm super excited about.
Me too. Cool. Well, I will see you then. Until then, keep reading, everybody.
Later.